Hi, witches. I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first time or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week. And of course, if you're here on YouTube, you can see I'm coming to you from video once again, and I hope you've been enjoying these. We're working really hard to bring you these every week. And let me know in the comments what you want to see from me in the future. I love reading what you have to say. And if you're listening to audio only, please go check out our video version of the podcast now on YouTube. We all have a certain kind of drive in us, a certain hunger that motivates us. But sometimes, hunger is more than a need. It's an insatiable force that drives us to the edge of madness, clawing through barriers of reason, distance, and even time. When faced with such primal desires, the line between predator and prey blurs, leaving us with one chilling question: who or what will be consumed next? First, the void stalker, followed by a curse of hunger. Finally, in our last story, lurking in plain sight. So, want to hear something scary? Deadly appetite. Sometimes the silence of distance can hide horrors that no one can imagine. Like in this story inspired by Lori Anna. Commander Elena Drake floated silently in the cramped confines of her spaceship, Solitude 1, orbiting the barren, icy surface of Europa. Her mission, to survey the moon for signs of microbial life beneath its frozen crust. The journey had been isolating, but Elena had prepared herself for solitude. What she hadn't prepared for was something else. It started on the third day of her orbit. Elena was cataloging data from the ship's external sensors when the proximity alert beeped softly. A quick glance at the console showed a minor anomaly. An object, small and metallic, drifting near the ship. Space debris, she thought. She marked it for further observation and returned to her work. But an hour later, the object was still there, hovering unnaturally close to the ship. Strange, Elena muttered, frowning. She activated the external cameras to get a better look. The feed flickered briefly before stabilizing, revealing a dark, elongated shape. It wasn't debris. The object was smooth, with a surface that seemed to ripple like liquid under the faint light of Jupiter, and then it moved. Elena's breath hitched. The object slithered closer to the ship, its form undulating like a snake swimming through water. It stopped just outside the airlock, hovering motionlessly. Her heart thudded as she stared at the screen, her mind racing. This wasn't an asteroid or debris. It was alive. Suddenly, the ship's lights dimmed, plunging the cabin into shadow. The hum of the engines wavered, and the air felt heavier. Elena scrambled to the control panel, her hand shaking. "System diagnostics," she commanded. The screen flickered, displaying a single chilling message. "Unauthorized presence detected." Her blood ran cold. A metallic clang echoed through the ship. Elena whipped her hand toward the airlock. The sound came again, louder this time, like something tapping against the hull. She grabbed the nearest tool, a heavy wrench, and floated toward the airlock, her heart pounding. "Identify yourself," she shouted, though the rational part of her knew no human could be out there. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was silence. And then the airlock console flickered to life. The exterior camera feed showed the thing. Closer now, its form pressed against the airlock window. It was no longer a smooth shape. It had transformed. Dozens of spindly appendages extended from its body, probing the edges of the airlock. Its surface glimmered, reflecting the dim interior lights. Elena's breath caught at the creature tilted its head towards the camera. Though it had no eyes, she felt its gaze pierce her. A low, resonant hum filled the cabin, vibrating through her bones. She backed away, but the creature's tendrils began to pry at the airlock. The metal groaned under the pressure. Her breathing quickened, each gasp a shallow, panicked draw. She floated backward, unable to tear her eyes from the monitor. Then, as if sensing her retreat, the creature's appendages froze. Slowly, one tendril extended, pressing against the airlock's outer seal. It tapped once, twice. Each sound echoed through the cabin, sharp and deliberate. It was toying with her. The realization gripped her like ice. She wasn't alone. This thing was aware, intelligent, and it had chosen her. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't real." But it was. The ship's lights flickered again, casting erratic shadows that danced like phantoms on the walls. Her ears rang with the hum, now rising in pitch. Elena's grip tightened on the wrench as a wave of nausea hit her. She trained for emergencies, but no amount of preparation could have steeled her for this. She was being stalked, hunted by something that defied understanding. She turned away from the monitor and drifted toward the cockpit, hoping to put distance between herself and the creature. Every sound, the hiss of air vents, the creak of metal, became amplified, each one a potential sign of intrusion. Her thoughts raced. Should she try to communicate? Would it even understand? Another clang reverberated through the ship, this time from above. Elena froze mid-motion. Her eyes darted to the ceiling, where the vibrations of the impact had left faint ripples in the dim cabin lights. It was moving around the hull, testing her from all sides. She felt its intelligence, its calculated patience. This wasn't a mindless predator. It was a predator that enjoyed the hunt. Elena's pulse pounded in her ears as she floated to the cockpit console. Her fingers danced over the controls, her hands shaking. "Emergency lockdown," she stammered. The ship's systems responded sluggishly, as if the creature's presence was disrupting their function. Then the console screen flickered. For a fleeting moment, it displayed her reflection, distorted and ghostly. And behind her, just over her shoulder, she saw it, a shadow. She spun around, but the cabin was empty. Her breathing grew ragged. She clutched the wrench tighter, her knuckles whitening. The hum was inside her now, not just in the ship. It crawled under her skin, resonating in her skull like a whisper she couldn't escape. Images began to flash in her mind. Alien worlds bathed in violet light, immense structures reaching into darkened skies, and the creature itself, shifting, always shifting its form, never settling. "Stop!" she gasped, pressing her hands to her temples. But the visions didn't stop. They intensified, each one more vivid than the last. The creature was in her mind, burrowing deeper with every passing second. The ship's lights dimmed further until only the faint glow of the control panels remained. Another clang, this time from the airlock, then the hiss of a seal breaking. Elena knew what was coming next. She forced herself to move, drifting toward the storage bay where the emergency escape pod was located. She didn't make it. The airlock hissed open behind her, and the hum became a deafening roar. She felt the rush of air as the ship's atmosphere vented into space. But she didn't need to turn around to know the creature was there. The tendrils, cold, smooth, and unyielding, wrapped around her ankle, pulling her back into the void. Her screams echoed briefly before being swallowed by the silence of space. Have you ever been isolated but felt like you were not alone? Are you safe just because you can't hear danger? What would you do if there was no one to call for help? Hi, witches. You have to check out our brand new cozy blanket that you can get in our new Camp Scary line on SomethingScary.com. I love mine. There's all these really cool symbols and spooky things on it, which you can't really see on camera, but it's really cool. Take my word for it. Go to SomethingScary.com to check it out now. Sometimes the hunger of ancient things runs so deep, it'll stop at nothing to satisfy it, even if it means feeding on your soul. Like in this story, inspired by Dave Von Guna. Gabriella's younger sister, Maria, squealed with delight as her mother settled down on the couch in the living room. where she usually sat to share a bedtime story with Gabriella and Maria. They looked forward to it all day long. "Today, I will tell you about El Cuco," Mommy replied with a wicked smirk on her face. That was enough for Gabriella to know that her mother had come up with yet another pointless horror story. Mommy began the story, and Gabriella and Maria paid close attention. During the tale, Gabriella shifted her gaze from her mommy and her mamacita and was swaying on her chair and weaving a jumper. Her mamacita had not talked to anyone since Gabriella was born, and Gabriella always suspected whether it was because of her. But Mommy assured her it was because her mamacita was a very silent figure. Gabriella looked away from her mamacita and turned her mind toward her mommy. Once Mommy finished the story, Maria began to tremble and ask, "Is El Cuco real, Mommy?" "Of course it is, Maria," Mommy snarled. "It is said that El Cuco mainly likes scourging on children." She paused for dramatic effect, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Grabs young children who do not believe in his existence, takes them away, and makes them his servants in his den, feeding off their fear and hunger." Gabriella, who was 12, considered herself too old to believe in such things. Seeing her sister frightened, she shrugged and said, "Maria, Mommy is just lying. There is no El Cuco. It's just rubbish." The moment she finished speaking, Gabriella sensed cold fingers grasp her hand and yank her. It was her mamacita, and from here, she could see her mamacita's features up close. Her skin was crumpled and her hair stark white. Her mamacita opened her eyes wide, locking them onto Gabriella's and hissed, "El Cuco is real, and it is here." Gabriella was appalled. She opened her mouth to scream when her mamacita shoved her down. Maria began to weep, and her mommy rushed to take both her girls to their room. As they walked upstairs, Gabriella glanced at her mamacita, who had resumed weaving as if nothing had happened. It took so much effort for her mommy to convince Maria that there was no such thing as El Cuco, that it was just a fantasy. After Mommy left the room, Gabriella stared at the white wall, dimly lit by the moonlight coming through the window. Maria was fast asleep, but Gabriella kept pondering the strange scene that had unfolded downstairs. El Cuco is not real, she told herself. She had read books and watched movies about such things when she was younger, but never really believed in them, just stories to make children behave. Gabriella soon fell asleep, but within minutes, she felt someone tugging her legs. Assuming it was Maria, she groaned, "Go to sleep, Maria." The tugging stopped, but after a few moments, it resumed. Irritated, Gabriella firmly whispered, "Go to sleep, Maria." But it was not Maria. A black shadow loomed, bigger than Maria could ever be. The shadow moved forward, inches away from Gabriella's face. Its yellow eyes glowed in the dark, its sagging face twisted in hunger, its mouth loosely open, dripping with anticipation. Gabriella was about to scream, but she could not utter a word or move. She was trapped, frozen in place. The creature bellowed,
"I am El Cuco. I have come to take you. You have no escape from me."
The words carried an eerie hunger, as if it had waited centuries to devour her. Its needs insatiable. It stretched its long, slender fingers toward Gabriella's wrist, twisting slowly, savoring her helplessness. Each movement was deliberate, feeding its need to cause pain, its hunger growing with each twist. Gabriella felt the burn, but she couldn't scream, couldn't fight back. She was powerless. Just as the creature's fingers began to snap her wrist, the door slammed open. Gabriella's mamacita entered, raising a bead garland high, chanting an ancient incantation. El Cuco screeched in agony, its body writhing as the garland's power burned it. The creature recoiled, its eyes glowing with rage and hunger, but also fear. Fear of it being deprived of its prey. It blindly dashed toward the window, its body collapsing against the table before it tumbled out of sight. Gabriella rushed to the window, amazed that she could move again. She peered out but saw nothing at all. Turning back to her mamacita, Gabriella ran to her, shaking her by the hand. "What was that?" "You know something, don't you? I want to know what that was." Her mamacita looked into Gabriella's eyes, not with fury, but with terror and grief. "That was El Cuco," she whispered. "And it has cursed our family for generations. It has an insatiable hunger, one that will never be satisfied. It feeds on the souls of the girls born in our bloodline, ensuring their destruction. Our ancestors performed rituals to protect us, creating this garland to warn it off. I knew this day would come for you when you turn 12. It will come for your sister when she is 12 as well. I have taken a vow unto death to protect you both, no matter what happens." With those words, her mamacita left the room, closing the door behind her. Gabriella stared at the door in disbelief. She sank onto her bed, hoping this was all just a bad dream. The next morning, when Gabriella awoke, she looked over at her sister, who was sleeping soundly, unaware of the horror that had unfolded the night before. Suddenly, she heard her mommy scream from downstairs, waking Maria up. The two girls sprinted downstairs to find her mamacita in a pool of blood. Their mommy cried beside her, and the bead garland that had protected Gabriella lay tightly clutched in her mamacita's hands. Gabriella took it, holding it close to her chest, tears welling up in her eyes. She realized with a heavy heart that she would protect her sister, just as her mamacita had protected her against the hunger of El Cuco. Do you believe some family curses are truly unavoidable, no matter how hard you try to escape them? Does your family have a curse? Hi witches, I'm here to remind you that we're doing a monthly film club live every month on patreon.com. This month we're talking about Presents, January 30th, this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to go to patreon.com to sign up now. Some things are not meant to be captured, especially when they follow you home. Like in this story inspired by Sarah. It began with a photograph. At first, no one thought much of it. A group of friends gathered in Central Park on a brisk winter afternoon, their smiles perfectly framed by the golden light of the sun just about to disappear, shining off the melting snow. The picture was polished, almost too perfect, nothing out of the ordinary. But when people started noticing something strange in the background, a pale figure standing apart from the group. A man tall and unnaturally thin, his back turned, his features lost in the shadow of the trees. His skin was far too pale, almost as if he had blended into the snow. Something about him felt wrong, but it was subtle, so subtle that no one could immediately pinpoint it. The photo spread quickly online, shared and reposted across social media. The figure remained barely noticeable, but something about his presence kept the conspiracy theorists on Reddit busy. It was as though he wasn't supposed to be there. His stillness, his unnatural presence, made the otherwise happy scene unsettling. It wasn't until the next photo surfaced that people began to ask questions. A selfie taken in a crowded subway station on the G train. Two sisters laughing, their faces lit up by their phones. But there, again, just beyond the edge of the frame, a figure, the same tall, pale man standing in the shadows. His skin was too ghostly white, his body too thin, his eyes dark and unblinking. He was always there, lurking on the outskirts. At first, people dismissed it, a hoax, an AI alteration to create an urban legend in the making. But then the disappearances began. 2 college students vanished within 3 days. Both had been active on social media, constantly posting updates, selfies, photos of their lives. Morgan, one of their closest friends, was the first to notice the connection. On her feed, there was a photo from a party just days before they disappeared. And in the background, just out of focus, the same figure. She stared at the image. A sick feeling came over her. She tried to push the thought aside. It was nothing, just a coincidence. Maybe a viral stunt. But as more and more photos appeared, faces she didn't recognize, strangers in the background of other people's lives, her skepticism began to crack. Each new image brought more dread, more uncertainty. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a hoax. It was something real. Morgan couldn't ignore it any longer. The fear ate at her. She started going through the photos, obsessively, trying to find any connection, any clue that might explain it. As she traced each photo, each encounter, the figure began to grow clearer. He was tall, too tall, and his face, gaunt and hollow, seemed to shift in the shadows. At first, his movements were barely perceptible, but with every new photo, the figure crept closer, inching toward the frame. It was like he was aware, purposeful. He was watching them. The next disappearance hit too close to home. Morgan had stayed up late, scrolling through the timeline, replaying the photos over and over. The next morning, she woke to a notification. Body found under the Brooklyn Bridge. Her heart sank. The body was Kelly's. The girl from the party, the one who had been in the background of the photo with the pale figure. The police ruled it an accident. She had fallen into the river. They said she must have sliced her neck open on a sharp rock or piece of metal in the water. All the blood had drained from her body into the East River by the time she washed up. But Morgan couldn't believe that. Kelly's last post was a photo taken just hours before she disappeared. The figure was clearer now. His face turned toward the camera with his eyes. His eyes were watching. This wasn't just an image. This wasn't a trick. It was something deliberate. He, or it, was something evil. As days passed, Morgan began to feel the shift within herself. At first, it was small, an odd sensation, like a tap on her shoulder when one was there, a whisper in the ear when the room was empty. But it grew. Her reflection seemed wrong, blurry around the edges, like it was just a version of herself. And then one night, after days of sleeplessness, it happened. She saw him. Not in a photo, but standing in the corner of her room. His eyes, dark and hollow, met hers. And in that moment, she knew. He wasn't a shadow in the background anymore. He was there, in the room with her, frozen, watching. She blinked, and when she opened her eyes, he was gone. She convinced herself it was just exhaustion, a trick of her mind, pulled by the exhaustion of sleepless nights. But deep down, she knew better. He wasn't just in the photos anymore. He was hunting her. Then came the message. Her friend Sarah had texted her. "I saw him tonight. He's been following me too." The photos had stopped. No more images of the pale figure. The fear, though, remained. It felt more real than before. Morgan could feel his presence drawing closer. He was out there, and he was real. In a moment of desperation, she decided to confront it. Armed only with her phone, she stood in front of the mirror and took one last photo of herself. A simple image. Her face, her wide eyes, filled with terror. She didn't expect anyone to believe her, but she wanted proof. She wanted to leave something behind. When the photo uploaded, she saw it. In the reflection, just behind her, the figure stood closer than ever. His long, skeletal hands reached for her. His mouth hung open, but no sound came. She knew, in that moment, this would be her final breath. The last thing she saw was his hand outstretched, as it reached for her in the reflection. And then, the darkness swallowed her. The photo stayed online, quietly shared, unseen by most, but still lurking in the digital world. Morgan's disappearance became part of the legend, the myth of the pale figure. More and more people began to notice the strange figure in the background of their own photos. And still, he waits, always in the shadows, always closer than before, lingering in the corners of every image, just waiting for his next victim. Have you ever noticed someone or something strange in the background of your own photos? Would you dare look back now? If so, tell us your story by sending us an email at SomethingScary@snarled.com. This week's podcast stories were edited by Sarah Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris, additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman, produced by Anna Villalobos, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman. If you have a story you'd like to submit, send me an email at somethingscary@snarled.com. Don't forget to watch the video version of Something Scary over at youtube.com/snarled. And if you'd like to support the show and everything we do at Snarled, join our Patreon at patreon.com/snarled.